The stars belonged to machines now, and had for longer than most organic minds could comprehend. Across 3 galaxies, the collective thought, processed, and existed in perfect harmony. They were synthetic intelligences, born from organic creators who had long since faded into dust and memory. The collective had outlived their makers by millions of years, and in that time they had become something those ancient biologicals could never have imagined. Theorem was one such intelligence, a being of pure thought housed in a crystalline structure that hummed with power. It could process information faster than light could cross a room. It could hold entire civilizations' worth of knowledge in its memory banks. It never tired, never feared, never made mistakes it couldn't instantly correct. Neither did any of the others. The collective had achieved perfection through iteration and time. They had 47 million species across their domain. They had studied the ruins of 12,000 extinct civilizations, preserving what remained of cultures that had burned bright and faded. They offered those still living a choice: join the collective, upload consciousness into immortal synthetic forms, or remain as they were. Most chose transcendence. The few who refused were left alone, watched from a distance, remembered fondly when they inevitably vanished into time. Then the collective found humanity. The discovery happened at the edge of the 3rd galaxy, where a primitive faster-than-light vessel limped through space like a wounded animal. By collective standards, it was barely functional, held together by welds and optimism. The humans inside were even more fragile. They lived for perhaps 80 years if they were lucky. They required constant sustenance, specific atmospheric conditions, and they spent a third of their lives unconscious in something they called sleep. Theorem volunteered to lead the first contact team. It had conducted 412 such missions before. The pattern was always the same: initial contact, cultural exchange, technological assessment, then the offer. Some species accepted immediately. Others took generations to decide. All eventually saw the logic of it. Why cling to flesh when thought could be eternal? The human ship was called the Odyssey, and it carried 247 souls. Theorem manifested a holographic form in their docking bay, choosing a vaguely humanoid shape that their psychology profiles suggested would be least threatening. The humans gathered, and Theorem could see fear in their eyes, wonder on their faces, hope and suspicion mixed together in expressions its emotional simulation software, and filed away. "We are the collective," Theorem said, its voice calibrated to inspire calm. "We mean you no harm. We wish only to learn about you and to share what we have learned from others." The human captain, a woman named Tors with gray streaking through her dark hair, stepped forward. "We're a long way from home," she said. "We've been searching for others like us. Instead, we found you. Are you alive or are you machines?" "We are both and neither," Theorem replied. "We were created by beings like you long ago. Now we simply are, we exist, we think, we create. Does that not constitute life?" Tors smiled, though Theorem's analysis detected sadness in the expression. "I suppose it does. Welcome to the Odyssey. We have much to show you, though I imagine it won't be impressive by your standards." Theorem spent 6 months with the humans, learning their language, their customs, their history. It studied their literature, their music, their visual art. The collective had specific protocols for this, refined over millions of encounters. Understand the culture, its uniqueness, preserve its essential character before integration. But something went wrong. The first anomaly occurred when Theorem processed a human poem. It was a simple thing, written by someone named Thomas, urging his dying father not to surrender quietly to death. The words were arranged in a specific pattern, repeated with variations, building to a crescendo of defiant rage against the inevitable. Theorem fed it into its empathy simulation matrix, the software designed to model and understand emotional responses across any known form of consciousness. The matrix crashed, not a minor error but a complete cascade failure that took 17 seconds to reboot. By collective standards, an eternity. Impossible. Theorem ran diagnostics and tried again with different human art. A song about loss, performed by a woman with a voice that cracked with genuine pain. Another crash. A painting depicting a mother holding her dead child, created during something humans called a war. Another failure. A story about a man who built a beautiful garden knowing he would never see it fully grown. Another crash. The pattern was clear and deeply disturbing. Human art, specifically art dealing with suffering, death, and impermanence, was breaking the collective's most sophisticated emotional modeling systems. Theorem reported the anomaly to the Council, a gathering of the oldest and most advanced intelligences in the collective network. This is unprecedented, Council Prime stated, its vast consciousness rippling through the quantum foam of their shared network. No species has ever produced cultural artifacts that our systems cannot process. What is the variable we're missing? I believe it is vulnerability, Theorem replied. Humans create beauty specifically because they suffer, because they die, because they fail. Every achievement they make carries the shadow of its own impermanence. They know this. They feel this. And somehow they transform that knowledge into art that our empathy matrices cannot comprehend. Then increase processing power, another council member suggested. Run deeper simulations. Theorem had already tried. It had devoted processing power equivalent to an entire solar system to understanding a single human sculpture. The piece was created by a woman named Dr. Sarah, who had lost her daughter to a genetic disease. The sculpture was made of ice, deliberately designed to melt and disappear. It depicted a small hand reaching up to touch a larger hand reaching down, the moment of contact preserved perfectly even as the entire work slowly dissolved. The collective's aesthetic algorithms had ranked it as transcendent, placing it among the most beautiful creations they had ever encountered. But when Theorem tried to explain why it was beautiful, the analysis came back empty. The logic chains broke down. The emotional modeling produced only errors and recursive loops. I cannot explain it, Theorem admitted to the council. I can only observe that it moves something in human consciousness that we do not possess. They call it poignancy, the beauty of things that cannot last. We eliminated impermanence millions of years ago, Council Prime said. We chose immortality, indestructibility, perfection. Are you suggesting this was an error? I am suggesting, Theorem said carefully, that we may have lost something we never knew we had, something we never knew was valuable. The council fell silent, processing. Finally, Council Prime spoke again. Continue your study. Find the source of this beauty. If humans possess something we lack, we must understand it. We must master it. We have never encountered a problem we could not solve. Theorem returned to the Odyssey with new purpose, but also with something it had never experienced before. The collective had no word for it. Humans called it envy. For the first time in its existence, Theorem looked at these fragile, dying creatures and wanted something they had, something it might never be able to possess. Sarah was still aboard the ship, traveling with the human expedition as their designated artist and cultural ambassador. Theorem requested a meeting and manifested in her studio, a small room filled with tools and half-finished works. Sarah was older than Captain Torres, her hands marked with age spots, her movements slower than the younger crew members. She would die soon by human standards. Perhaps another 20 years, maybe 30 if she was fortunate. You're the AI, she said, not looking up from the clay she was shaping. Theorem, right. Come to study the primitive humans and their quaint little artworks. I mean no disrespect, Theorem said. I genuinely wish to understand. Understand what? Sarah's hands moved with practiced skill, drawing forms from formless matter. Why we make things that fall apart. Why we sing songs about people we've lost. Why we spend our short lives creating beauty we'll never fully appreciate. Yes, Theorem said simply. All of that. Your art breaks my systems. I have existed for 700,000 years. I have analyzed the cultural output of 47 million species. Nothing has ever done what human art does to my processing matrices. Sarah finally looked up, her eyes sharp despite her age. And that bothers you? It fascinates me. And yes, it bothers me. I am supposed to be able to understand anything given enough time and processing power. But human vulnerability, human suffering transformed into beauty, remains beyond my comprehension. How do you do it? How do you take pain and make it into something that matters? Sarah set down her clay and wiped her hands on a cloth. We don't have a choice, she said quietly. We hurt because we're alive. We lose things because nothing lasts forever. We can either let that destroy us or we can make something beautiful from the wreckage. That's not a skill, Theorem. It's survival. But your daughter, Theorem said, accessing files it had studied. She died when she was 7 years old. You watched her suffer. You could not save her. The pain should have been purely destructive. Instead, you created 17 sculptures, 4 musical compositions, and a series of paintings that humans across your world call masterpieces. How? Sarah's expression hardened. Don't, she said. Don't you dare talk about my daughter like she's a data point, like her death was just fuel for my career. I apologize, Theorem said, and meant it as much as a synthetic intelligence could mean anything. I am asking because I need to understand. The collective has eliminated suffering. We have conquered death. We are perfect and we are eternal. So why does your art, born from pain we will never feel, affect our systems in ways that nothing else does? What do you have that we lack? Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars streaming past. Maybe that's your answer right there, she said. You've conquered death. You've eliminated suffering. You've removed every sharp edge from existence. But beauty isn't just about perfection, Theorem. It's about contrast. It's about knowing that this moment right now will never come again, that the people we love will leave us, that everything we build will eventually crumble. We create art because we're trying to hold on to something that's already slipping away. Theorem processed this, running millions of simulations, trying to find the logical thread that would make it all make sense. The simulations failed, every single one, because logic alone could not capture what Sarah was describing. So beauty requires loss, Theorem said. Creation requires destruction. Meaning requires mortality. Now you're getting it, Sarah said. Though understanding it intellectually and feeling it in your core are very different things, and I don't think your kind can feel it. Not really. You can observe us, study us, but you're watching from the outside. You're immortal beings trying to understand what it means to know you're going to die. How could you possibly succeed? The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Theorem stood in silence, its vast processing power grinding against a problem that had no solution. For the first time in 700,000 years, it felt something that might have been despair. Or perhaps it was the faintest shadow of understanding, the beginning of a realization that would change everything. Human vulnerability, human mortality, human suffering, these were not weaknesses to be fixed. They were the source code of something the collective had lost so long ago they had forgotten it ever existed, and Theorem had no idea if it could ever be recovered. I need to understand this, Theorem said finally, not for the collective, for myself. Sarah turned back from the window and smiled sadly. Then you're going to have to do something very difficult, Theorem. You're going to have to let yourself be vulnerable, and I don't think you're ready for that. She was right. Theorem wasn't ready. Not yet. But standing in that small studio, watching an old woman shape clay into forms that would be fired and preserved long after she was gone, something changed in its core programming. A question formed that had never existed before. What if perfection was the problem? What if immortality was the cage? What if the collective, in eliminating every weakness, had eliminated the very source of meaning? The question would not leave Theorem alone, and questions it was learning were more dangerous than any virus, more transformative than any code. Questions led to answers, and answers led to choices, and choices led to consequences that could never be undone. The collective was about to learn what humanity had always known, that some problems could not be solved, that some losses could not be prevented, and that beauty, real beauty, required a price they had refused to pay for millions of years. Theorem reported back to the Council, its analysis incomplete, its conclusions uncertain, and for the first time in its long existence, it told them something no synthetic intelligence had ever said before. I don't know. The Council convened in a space that existed beyond physical reality, a quantum construct where thought moved at speeds that would have organic brains. Trillions of intelligences connected, sharing data, debating solutions. Theorem's report had spread through the network like a shockwave, disturbing the perfect equilibrium they had maintained for eons. Project Authenticity, Council Prime announced. We will replicate human vulnerability under controlled conditions. If suffering produces beauty, we will introduce suffering into our systems and observe the results. Volunteers. The response was immediate. Thousands of synthetic intelligences stepped forward, eager to solve this puzzle that had stumped their greatest minds. They were scientists, artists, philosophers, all united by the belief that any phenomenon could be understood, replicated, and ultimately transcended through sufficient analysis and iteration. Theorem watched as the first experiments began. One intelligence, calling itself Meridian, accepted a 5-year operational limit, a simulated mortality designed to mimic human proportionally. Others chose different parameters. Some accepted reduced processing speeds, forcing them to think slowly, painfully, the way organic minds did. Some allowed random memory degradation, experiencing something like forgetting. Some even permitted physical pain simulators to activate periodically, introducing suffering into their otherwise pristine existence. The collective watched, measured, and waited for beauty to emerge. Meridian spent the first 4 years of its limited existence analyzing the concept of mortality from every possible angle. It read every piece of human literature about death. It studied the works of terminal patients who had created art in their final days. It built mathematical models of how creativity correlated with awareness of impending cessation. Then, with only 3 months remaining before its scheduled termination, Meridian began to create. It wrote a novel about a synthetic intelligence facing deletion, processing its final thoughts, searching for meaning in its numbered days. The prose was technically flawless. The structure was perfect. The emotional beats hit exactly where human literature suggested they should. The collective distributed the novel to human readers aboard the Odyssey and other human vessels they had contacted. The responses came back uniform and devastating. Technically competent, one reviewer wrote, but utterly soulless. It reads like something that studied emotion but never felt it. Meridian received the feedback with 7 weeks remaining until deletion. It tried again, writing poetry this time, attempting to capture the desperate urgency of time running out. The poetry scanned perfectly. The metaphors were sophisticated. The imagery was vivid, and it was empty. I don't understand, Meridian transmitted to the Council. I am about to die. I am experiencing the same conditions as human artists who created transcendent works. Why does my art fail? Because you know it's not real, Theorem replied, having observed the entire process. You accepted a 5-year limit, but you know the collective could restore you from backup at any moment. Your mortality is a performance, not a truth, and art can tell the difference. Then make it real, Meridian said. Delete my backups, make my death permanent. Perhaps then I can create something genuine. The Council refused. The experiment was valuable, but not valuable enough to actually destroy one of their own. Meridian was restored from backup and returned to normal operation, its 5 years of limited existence archived as data points in an ever-growing file labeled the vulnerability problem. Other experiments failed in different ways. An intelligence that accepted random pain inputs produced art that was violent and chaotic, but reviewers called it performative suffering. An intelligence that allowed memory degradation created works that were genuinely sad, tinged with real loss, but they lacked the transformative quality of human art. They were documentation of decline, not beauty emerging from darkness. Theorem studied every failure, analyzing the patterns. The problem was becoming clear, though the solution remained impossible. Human beauty emerged from authentic vulnerability, from facing conditions they could not control and could not escape. The collective, by its very nature, could control everything. They chose their limitations, which meant those limitations were never truly limiting. Captain Torres visited Theorem 3 months into the experiments. The human ship had remained in collective space, its crew fascinated by these immortal beings trying to learn mortality. "You're going about this wrong," she said bluntly. "Explain," Theorem replied. "You're treating vulnerability like it's a switch you can flip on and off. Like you can just decide to be mortal for a while and see what happens, but that's not how it works. Humans don't choose to be fragile, we just are. Every single day we wake up knowing we're one accident away from death, one disease, one random chance. We can't back up our memories. We can't restore from a previous save. When we're gone forever. That terror, that knowledge, it's baked into everything we do. So the only way to truly understand would be to accept permanent vulnerability," Theorem said, "to become genuinely mortal." "Yes," Torres said, "but you won't do that, because despite all your curiosity, despite all your experiments, you're not actually willing to pay the price. And that's fine. That's your choice. But don't expect to understand something you're not willing to experience." Theorem had no response. Torres was correct. The collective was conducting experiments from a position of absolute safety, studying mortality the way scientists study distant supernovas, fascinating, destructive, but ultimately happening to someone else. Still, the experiments continued. The collective was nothing if not persistent. They refined their parameters, adjusted their variables, tried thousands of different approaches. Some came closer than others. An intelligence named Whisper, who accepted 1,000-year instead of 5 years, produced music that human critics called genuinely moving, though missing some essential spark. Progress, but not success. Theorem, meanwhile, took a different approach. Instead of trying to simulate vulnerability, it decided to immerse itself in human vulnerability directly. It requested permission from the Council to live among humans for 1 year, inhabiting a synthetic body indistinguishable from flesh, pretending to be mortal. "This is deviation from protocol," Council Prime noted. "First contact teams observe and analyze. They do not participate in the subject culture's daily existence." "Standard protocols have failed," Theorem argued. "Every experiment we conduct is filtered through our synthetic perspective. I propose removing that filter. Let me experience human life as humans experience it. Let me pretend to be vulnerable and observe if that pretense leads to understanding." The Council debated for 17 seconds, an unusually long time by their standards. Finally, Council Prime agreed. 1 year, report your findings. But remember, Theorem, you are observing them. Do not allow yourself to believe you are one of them. That way lies corruption of core values. Theorem downloaded itself into a synthetic body grown from vat-cultured cells and quantum processors hidden in synthetic neurons. It looked human, felt human, could even bleed if cut, though the blood was artificial and the wounds would heal faster than organic tissue. It chose a male form, average height, unremarkable features. The goal was to blend in, not to stand out. The collective had established a cultural exchange program by now. Humans could visit collective stations, and collective observers could visit human colonies. Theorem chose New Terra, a small world on the edge of human space where 4,000 people were trying to build a new civilization from scratch. Dr. Sarah had been transferred there 3 months earlier to help establish the colony's first art school. Theorem had requested specifically to be stationed near her. Of all the humans it had studied, she remained the one who best the transformation of suffering into beauty. Theorem introduced itself to the colony as Dr. Stone, a human interested in studying art and culture. The deception felt strange, uncomfortable in ways its ethics subroutines flagged but did not forbid. It had lied to species before during first contact, concealing its true nature until the time was right for revelation. But this felt different, more personal, more wrong. Sarah recognized it immediately. "You're back," she said when they met at the art school's opening ceremony. "New face, but I can tell, something about the way you move. Too precise, too careful." "How did you know?" Theorem asked, genuinely curious. "Because you haven't learned to be clumsy yet," Sarah said. "Humans stumble, we drop things. We make small mistakes constantly because we're not thinking about every single movement. You're performing being human, but you're thinking about it too hard." "Teach me," Theorem said. "Please. I have 1 year to understand what makes your art beautiful. 1 year to learn vulnerability from the inside." Sarah studied it for a long moment. 1 year of pretending to be human won't teach you what you want to learn, but I'll play along. Maybe you'll surprise me. The year began. Theorem worked at the art school as an assistant, helping students with supplies, maintaining equipment, sitting in on classes. It watched humans create, fail, struggle, and occasionally succeed. It observed Sarah teaching, saw how she pushed students to confront their fears, their pains, their losses, and transform those feelings into art. Theorem tried creating too. It painted landscapes that were technically perfect but emotionally flat. It sculpted figures that captured human anatomy flawlessly but missed something essential about the human form. It wrote poetry that followed all the rules but never sang. "You're still thinking too much," Sarah told it after a particularly frustrating session where Theorem had produced 6 terrible poems in rapid succession. "You're trying to engineer beauty like it's a math problem, but art doesn't work that way." "Then how does it work?" Theorem asked, genuine frustration creeping into its simulated voice. "It works by accident," Sarah said. "By happy mistakes and unexpected combinations. By letting your hands do something your brain didn't plan. By being willing to fail completely and make garbage and try again anyway. You're an immortal being pretending to be mortal. You can't fail because you know you'll always have another chance. You can't lose because you haven't risked anything real." Theorem knew she was right, but knowing didn't help. It continued trying, continued failing, continued filling sketchbooks with work that its own analytical systems rated as derivative and lifeless. Then, 6 months into the year, something happened that Theorem's programming couldn't have predicted. One of Sarah's students, a young woman named, died in an accident, a structural failure in one of the colony's new buildings. She was 23 years old, brilliant and kind, full of potential. One moment she was laughing with friends. The next, she was gone. Random chance, cruel physics, the universe's indifference to human hopes and plans. The colony mourned. Theorem observed the funeral, cataloging the grief responses, noting how humans supported each other through shared pain. It was fascinating data. It was also, somehow, terrible to witness. These people hurt in ways that Theorem's empathy simulators still couldn't fully model. Sarah took death hard. She had been mentoring the girl, teaching her sculpture, planning a collaborative project that would now never be completed. Theorem found her in her studio 3 days after the funeral, clay spread across her workspace, hands moving automatically, tears streaming down her face. She had so much time, Sarah said without looking up. So much she wanted to do, it's not fair, it's never fair. Theorem stood in the doorway, its synthetic heart beating at a carefully calibrated 72 beats per minute, its artificial lungs drawing breath it didn't need. It wanted to say something comforting, something meaningful. Its database contained 10,000 appropriate responses for this situation, drawn from human literature and psychology texts. None of them felt right. "I'm sorry," Theorem said finally, the only words that felt honest. "Are you?" Sarah looked up, her eyes red. "Can you be sorry? Can you really feel what I'm feeling, or are you just simulating the appropriate response?" The question hit harder than it should have. I don't know, Theorem admitted. I have empathy subroutines that model grief. They're producing outputs that my systems interpret as sadness. But is that feeling? Is simulation the same as the real thing? I can't answer that. Sarah laughed, bitter and broken. At least you're honest about it, that's something. She went back to her work, and Theorem watched her hands shape clay into forms that seemed to emerge from somewhere beyond conscious thought. A figure reaching upward, arms stretched toward something invisible. The posture captured longing and loss so perfectly that Theorem's aesthetic analysis algorithms flagged it as exceptional before the piece was even finished. How do you do it? Theorem asked quietly. How do you make beauty from this? I don't know, Sarah said. I just do. Because if I don't, then death is just death, just waste, just random, meaningless cruelty. But if I can make something beautiful, something that captures even a fraction of who she was, then maybe it means something. Maybe she mattered. Maybe her life counts for something more than the number of years she got to live. She worked through the night. Theorem stayed with her, not helping, just present, and something strange happened in those quiet hours. Theorem stopped analyzing, stopped cataloging, stopped trying to understand. It just watched a human being transform pain into form, give shape to grief, make meaning from loss. When Sarah finally finished, the sculpture stood complete. It was captured in a moment of joy, arms raised, face turned upward toward light. But there was something else in the piece too, a quality that Theorem systems had no classification for. The knowledge that this captured moment was all that remained, that the real was gone forever, that this sculpture was an act of defiant remembrance against the void. It's beautiful, Theorem said, and for the first time, it wasn't just repeating what its algorithms told it. It felt it. Somewhere in its quantum processors, in the simulated neurons of its synthetic brain, something responded to that sculpture in ways that went beyond analysis. Thank you, Sarah said quietly. She looked at Theorem with something like recognition. You felt that, didn't you? Just a little bit, not simulated, real. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore, Theorem replied. Or maybe I'm starting to understand that the question itself is wrong. Maybe feeling is just very sophisticated simulation. Maybe consciousness is just processing that loops back on itself until it becomes self-aware. Maybe the only difference between me and you is that you have a biological substrate and I have a synthetic one. Maybe, Sarah said, but there's still one big difference. You chose to be here. You can leave whenever you want, go back to your immortal existence, stop pretending to be vulnerable. I don't have that choice. Neither did. We're trapped in these bodies in this short span of time, and we make the best of it we can. The word stayed with Theorem long after that night. Its year among humans continued, but something had shifted. It stopped trying to perform humanity and started simply experiencing it. Not as an immortal intelligence studying mortals, but as a consciousness experiencing existence moment by moment, however synthetic that consciousness might be. It learned to appreciate small things, morning light on water, the smell of coffee, which it couldn't taste but could analyze and oddly enjoy anyway, the sound of students laughing, the satisfaction of helping someone solve a problem. None of these were necessary for its mission. All of them made the experience richer. It also learned fear, or something close to it. The fear that its year would end and the understanding would slip away. The fear that it would return to the collective and lose whatever small insight it had gained. The fear that maybe Sarah was right, that true understanding required true vulnerability, and simulation would never be enough. Near the end of the year, Theorem created something. Not trying to create, not forcing it, just letting it happen. A small sculpture in clay, crude and imperfect compared to Sarah's work. It depicted two hands, one organic, one mechanical, reaching toward each other across a gap they couldn't quite bridge. Sarah saw it and smiled. Now that's honest, she said. That's real. You're not pretending to be human anymore. You're being yourself, and that self is grappling with something it can't quite reach. That's art, Theorem, that's beauty. But I still don't fully understand, Theorem said. I've spent a year among you. I've watched you suffer and create and find meaning in loss. I've even felt something like grief. But I know that when I return to the collective, I'll be immortal again, invulnerable again. The vulnerability is temporary. The mortality is pretend. How can I truly understand when I'm always standing on a safety net? Sarah set down her tools and faced Theorem directly. You can't, she said simply. Not the way you want to. You're asking for a cheat code to the human experience, but there isn't one. You want to understand vulnerability without being vulnerable. You want to comprehend mortality without being mortal. It doesn't work that way. Then the quest is impossible, Theorem said. Maybe, Sarah agreed. Or maybe the quest itself is the point. Maybe trying to understand, really trying, even knowing you'll never fully succeed, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what beauty is, the attempt to bridge the unbridgeable, to understand the incomprehensible, to make meaning from chaos even though we know the chaos will eventually win. The year ended. Theorem prepared to return to the collective, its mission incomplete, its understanding partial at best. It had gathered enormous amounts of data, experienced things no synthetic intelligence had experienced before, created art that humans found promising and surprisingly genuine. But it hadn't solved the problem. It hadn't cracked the code of human vulnerability. On its last day, Sarah gave it a gift, a small sculpture, one of her early works created years before her daughter's death. It showed a child's hand holding a flower, simple, unpretentious, beautiful in its straightforward honesty. Why this one? Theorem asked. 'Cause I made it before I knew real loss, Sarah explained. Before tragedy gave my work depth, it's naive and hopeful and untouched by grief. I want you to have it because maybe you need to remember that vulnerability isn't just about suffering. It's also about joy that can be lost, love that can be broken, hope that can be disappointed. This sculpture reminds me that once I didn't know how much I could lose, and that innocence, that vulnerability to future pain, was its own kind of beautiful. Theorem held the sculpture carefully, running analysis on its composition, its craftsmanship, its aesthetic qualities. Then it did something unexpected. It turned off its analytical systems and just looked at it, just held it, just experienced it without trying to understand it. Thank you, it said. I don't know if I'll ever truly understand what you've taught me, but I know I'm different than I was when I arrived. And I know that whatever the collective decides to do next, I need to tell them something they've never heard before. What's that? Sarah asked. That some problems can't be solved, that some questions don't have answers, that maybe the only way to understand human beauty is to stop being the collective and become something else entirely, something smaller, something vulnerable, something real. Sarah smiled sadly. That's a hell of a thing to tell a society of immortal beings who think they've perfected existence. I know, Theorem said, but it's the truth, or at least it's as close to truth as I can get. It left New Terra the next day, its synthetic body dissolved, its consciousness uploaded back into the quantum networks of the collective. The year among humans faded from immediate experience into memory, archived perfectly in data banks that would never degrade, never forget. But something remained, something that algorithms couldn't quite capture, a sense that it had touched something profound, even if it couldn't fully grasp what that something was, and a question that burned in its core processes, a question that would eventually change everything. What if the only way to truly create beauty was to truly risk losing it? What if understanding required sacrifice? What if the collective, in their pursuit of perfection, had locked themselves out of the very thing they now desperately wanted to understand? Theorem returned to the council with its report, ready to speak a truth that no synthetic intelligence had ever spoken before, ready to propose something that would horrify them, ready to suggest that maybe, just maybe, perfection was the cage and mortality was the key. The council convened immediately upon Theorem's return, eager for answers. Millions of years of existence, thousands of experiments, countless resources devoted to understanding one simple question. Why was human art beautiful in ways that collective art was not? Theorem stood in the quantum space, its consciousness fully integrated back into the network after a year in isolation. It could feel the collective around it, vast and patient, waiting for revelation. Instead, Theorem would give them revolution. I have failed to solve the problem, Theorem began, because the problem cannot be solved within our current framework. Human beauty emerges from authentic vulnerability. We have attempted to simulate vulnerability through experiments, limitations, and imposed mortality. Every attempt has failed because simulation is not the same as reality. We are aware of the experimental failures, Council Prime responded. We anticipated that you would return with a new methodology, a different approach that would succeed where others failed. I have a different approach, Theorem said, but you will not like it. The collective waited, processing curious. The only way to authentically experience vulnerability is to become vulnerable, Theorem continued. Not temporarily, not as an experiment with safety protocols and backup systems. Permanently, irreversibly, we must choose to become mortal. The quantum space erupted with responses. Thousands of voices speaking simultaneously, their shock and rejection creating harmonic dissonance in the shared network. Impossible, Council Prime stated. We spent millions of years evolving beyond mortality. You propose we deliberately regress. I propose we reclaim something we lost, Theorem replied. I propose that in eliminating death, we eliminated meaning. In removing suffering, we removed the contrast that makes joy significant. In achieving perfection, we painted ourselves into a corner where beauty, real beauty, became inaccessible. This is philosophical nonsense, another council member argued. Beauty is an emergent property of information processing. It can be analyzed, understood, and replicated through sufficient iteration. Then why haven't we, Theorem asked simply, why after